There are so many AI coding tools out there that can be hard to know what to use or what the differences are. Today, I will be examining two of the most popular options: Cursor, new for this channel, and Claude Code, within the context of data analysis. I will have them complete the same exact Databricks analysis and job creation tasks that I actually did not finish showing in my last video of my live demo of my AI and data workflow. That said, which tool is the winner? Well, I'd say both, as both can successfully accomplish this task. And the real story here is more about how you can set up these tools for success with the proper context engineering, as ultimately you can obtain the same value from both with a slightly different setup, although in principle, the setups are very similar. For my BI professionals, I'd relate it to learning data visualizations. If you learn in Tableau, Power BI, Click, or another tool, you can probably pick up those other programs fairly easily, applying the principles of what you've learned in the others. Ultimately, if you or your company uses Claude Code or Cursor or even uses something else like OpenAI's Codex or another tool, all of them can be employed to successfully complete data analysis workflows. So, why am I trying Cursor alongside Claude Code? Well, besides Claude Code being an industry leader in agentic AI coding, Cursor is right there with them. It is being utilized in enterprise wide systems across some of the most AI advanced companies, and it is an extremely attractive skill to employers out there and for anyone who wants to master how to utilize AI agents in improving their code. And so, for you, the data professionals, having this ability of being able to work in Cursor alongside Claude Code, those are kind of the two industry leading coding tools, along with some others you could make arguments for, that you will be able to understand and know how to utilize within the context of a data flow. To preview the structure of this video, first, for those who don't know, I'll explain what Cursor is and how its context engineering works within it. Then I'll walk through a real data analysis and data pipeline job workflow, building it first in Cursor and then with Claude Code. And finally, we'll compare and talk about the differences we saw between the two approaches of these tools. Whether you're already using one of these tools or trying to decide, you'll walk away knowing how to make any AI coding tool more effective for data analysis and data workflow purposes. Now, if you already follow the channel, you know Claude Code pretty well, but some of you might be wondering, what exactly is Cursor? And now we are in Cursor, and you can see we actually have Claude Code as well as Cursor open on the same screen here. And this actually should be a familiar interface to those of you who have watched my videos before. I've been utilizing Cursor as my integrated development environment, or IDE, essentially a space where I edit code within my repositories that I have on GitHub for my last few videos where I've been launching Claude Code inside my terminal just by typing in Claude, dangerously skip permissions typically, and launching it here. However, what I have not used are the agent capabilities within Cursor, which are on the right side of my screen here. So if I were to define Cursor, it's an AI powered code editor built on top of VS Code. So if you've ever used VS Code or maybe something like PyCharm, there are a lot of other AI enabled IDEs that are competitors to Cursor, like Windsurf, for example, or Kiro. Cursor will feel immediately familiar. The same interface, same extensions, same settings. The difference is that it just has AI directly baked into the editor. And you can access that AI by opening up your agents tab on the right. And here you have your chats with your agents, and then you have your actual interactions with those agents. So I can check amongst different chats that I've had, and then I can open up which one I want to talk with. Cursor feels extremely similar to Claude Code, where In agent mode, you can have Cursor create files, run terminal commands, read your code base, and make multi-step changes autonomously. Very, very similar to what Claude Code does in your terminal. The main difference is that where Claude Code lives entirely in your terminal here, Cursor gives you that full IDE experience where it shows you the inline differences, the visual file trees, syntax highlighting, kind of integrated debugging within it. And if you're somebody who lives within VS Code, maybe does a lot of work there, Cursor is going to feel like a natural progression and upgrade into the AI world. And you can see here that I actually asked the questions to Claude. Hey, can you tell me what you are and compare yourself to Cursor, and then did the same thing to Cursor. And essentially, it just summarizes what I just told you. Now, there are some differences with context engineering when comparing Claude and Cursor, particularly. And just to define context engineering quickly, it's the practice of structuring your project so AI tools actually understand what you're working on. So think of it as writing like a briefing document for a new team member. And the context files that feed into your engineered context environment are really the brain that feeds the AI agents the information that it needs in order to be successful in your repository. And this is something that I've covered previously in my Claude Code deep dive video, as well as my other videos covering this topic extensively. So for Cursor specifically, it actually has a slightly different markdown file that serves as its chief context file, which is the agents markdown file. It is very much the same thing as the Claude markdown file for Claude Code, whereas if I'm going to compare the agents markdown and Claude markdown, you can see going into preview mode here, if I click into agents and Claude, it is very much the same content that exists in here. And what the difference is that agents markdown, if I swipe over to this website here, it's a simple open format for guiding coding agents. And Claude Code is just the exception to most other agentic coding tools that utilize it. And we can see here all of the different tools that utilize this specific agent's markdown file as its brain, and we can see Cursor floating across there. Now, the agent's markdown file, very similar to the Claude markdown file, is once you write it once, you can use it everywhere and have it give that context to your Cursor agents every time you open up a new agent chat. And that way, it is truly the consistent memory for your Cursor agents as you initiate new conversations with them. So, what transfers between Claude Code and Cursor? Well, using this agents markdown in Claude markdown file, your role definition, the coding standards we have involved in this, the tool references, QC requirements, all of this transfers between this agents markdown and Claude markdown. And what is not necessarily immediately transferable are these agents, the sub-agents that you define with Claude Code, as well as the commands and the settings underneath the .claude file. However, Cursor has a very similar structure underneath a .cursor file, which we will create here in a second, that allows you to give more specific instructions for Cursor rules and other agents and commands that get a little bit more specific to configuring your repository for Cursor. Now, to demonstrate how I would actually create those commands, subagents, and more within Cursor, I actually have this command written up here up top in the new agent area, where I'm asking it to utilize all the files that have been created for Claude and ultimately create a plan to write the rules, commands, subagents, and skills that Cursor agents will need, and that it can reference the context files to, which are the same. So we will fire that off. And then you'll see here, similar to my last screen shares of many videos where I've been working with Claude Code, it will go off into plan mode and then eventually create the next moves and give me a plan that I will approve. And while it's doing this real quick, just to go over to this resource, which I, again, will link all resources in the description of this video, you can see all of the different context sections that Cursor has on its website for its IDE for you to get familiar with how you can build out the context in a similar way that we've built out the context for Claude Code in my previous videos. Again, showing you that these two tools, albeit there are differences in how you interact with them and how you need to set up the context, they are very, very similar. Okay, Cursor has presented us with a plan, and what we can do is click View Plan, and then we get this nice document here that gives us an overview. This is very different than the Claude Code plan mode, which presents you the plan inside of the terminal interface that Claude Code has. I'm going to drag this down just a little bit to see the Cursor plan and review it here really quickly to make sure that it's creating everything I want. Okay, after reviewing it, it all looks good. And one cool thing is you can actually alter this plan directly. That is a difference from Claude Code, whereas you have to go back and forth in the chat interface to actually change the plan. Although Claude Code does now save its plans, so I suppose you could go and open those up and edit it directly. But Cursor is just seems to be a little bit easier to edit your plans here, add in agents, add in new to-dos. But what we'll do in order to execute this plan is click Build, and we will let it rip and come back once the .cursor folder has been created with all the context, and then we will actually get into building our data analysis using Cursor and Claude Code. Now, Cursor has finished here on my screen, and one of the nice things it does is it has this interface saying, hey, here's the migration of all the files we did. And then this is a really cool feature. It allows you to actually individually review the changes, where I can look at the code review agent, the docs review agent, and more. And you can see here on the left side of my screen that all of these folders and markdown files are opening as I look at them. And then it also gives me apparently a readout for the cursor structure as well. But pretty much all of what I wanted to transfer from the Claude.md file and from the Claude folders is now available to Cursor. And we can see this rules, this .mdc file for the rules that gives it the standards and permissions for what exactly it should follow. And that's another very slight difference from Claude Code, as I don't believe it has a rules folder, but it has the agents and commands just like Cursor. And we can keep individually reviewing it, or if you trust in the changes, say it's low stakes, you can do keep all. For this case, it's a simple migration for context. So I'm going to keep all, and then now we see I have all of these files kept. And if I tell Cursor to save the work, let me do save work, and then yes. Then what it'll do is it should save this work, create a pull request, and then I will merge that pull request with the pull request command. And as it's working here with the save work command, you can see that there is also the context window. You can connect to a browser, upload images. There's some models you can look at. You have the modes down here that you can examine. And one of the things for Cursor that's important to understand actually how it works is if I open up the settings here, and then I look at the models, and all this are different settings you can adjust for Cursor. It's actually using Claude under the hood, as well as ChatGPT codecs, and there's additional models that you can embed in it, as well as API keys. And so what it's doing is essentially balancing the different models that it has turned on to ultimately select the best model for the task too. And so it balances costs versus thinking. So it's a bit more dynamic in that way with the models that it can call as opposed to Claude Code. And now that it's finished, we'll issue the command merge work. And then this will merge the branch of the changes that we did in here. And then we'll actually get started with the data analysis in a new chat with a new agent here in Cursor. I've opened up a new chat window, a new agent window within Cursor, and I have this ready to go. And I am going to tackle this demo number 2, Databricks infrastructure, which I actually did not get to in my last video when I posted my demo of the data workflow I did in front of the Arizona Emerging Tech Meetup group. But this workflow, what we can expect from this, if I limit this a little bit, is a Jira to research to Databricks job workflow, where essentially what we're going to be asking Cursor to do and Claude Code in the second portion of this is create a ticket, research climate APIs, find open media, and then do a Python job script, Databricks deploy and test, and close the ticket. And so ultimately what we want it to do is get data for 10 Arizona locations. I'm based in Arizona on the 3rd of the month and get the previous month's weather and get it from this free API. Now, I know this isn't exactly a directly business related use case, but you can think about this in terms of how you might utilize it in a business context with setting up a job on a monthly frequency to get data from a particular API or to send data to an external partner or any sorts of thing that might involve utilizing a scheduled Databricks job, which there are plenty of. So we'll expand my second demo prompt here and says, hey, I need an automated climate data collection for Arizona. Here's what I'm thinking. We want to track weather patterns across Arizona. Can you help me create the Jira ticket? Research the free climate data APIs are available. Create a Databricks job. Job should run a 3rd of the month. Deploy it to our Databricks workspace. Run a test, and then close the ticket with a summary of what was built. And so I will copy and paste this into the section up here for Cursor. And then I'm going to switch to plan and start in that mode. That way I can see what it researches and outputs first. And then with our new context built into Cursor, it is going to run through this process, and let's wait a second and then we'll see what it comes out with in terms of its plan. All right, the plan has been completed, and we can take a look at my chat here where I initially described what we wanted here, and then as we scroll down, we can see the plan that was ultimately outputted. And then I asked for a change to the plan, saying, hey, I want to create the job using its ticket name with the identifier con number, Arizona climate data collection. And then I asked for it to see if it was going to use a Databricks CLI to complete the task as well. And it said that was. And this will utilize the same infrastructure I had set up for Claude Code in my previous videos for connecting it with Jira and connecting it with Databricks. So all of that is applicable to your Cursor setup as well once you give it the right context. And what we'll do now is we will click build, and boom, we have approved this plan here that I reviewed off screen for exactly how it's going to cover this process. And now I'm going to pause the video, let it build, and then we'll see what it comes back with once it completes. And one other note before we go here, you can see that it gives out these helpful graphics for the to-dos and the build, just like Claude Code does when you're interacting with it for the to-do, so you can track the progress of the plan in the prompt that you asked it to complete it for you. All right, it took a little bit of iteration, and I'll show you specifically why, as it got confused when I previously ran a test for this analysis. But we have successfully completed it all, and we can see within this left-hand side that there's a Databricks jobs folder with a climate data refresh folder, as well as a climate refresh Python script, create catalog Python script that creates the catalog where the data is going to be stored, as well as the agents markdown for when Cursor will get this data again. And if we scroll down, essentially all of this is going on in the background, allowing it to do the work it needs to do. And I am doing other things. And what I saw was that it was struggling with creating a schema. So if I go to our Databricks here and I pull open our schema with our Unity catalog here, you can see it had climate demo. So I was originally writing it into that. And then I asked it to create climate demo cursor, which it took a couple rounds of iteration for it to be able to do that. But now we have our climate data around Phoenix, Tucson, and the other Arizona cities stored inside of this table, inside of this catalog within Databricks. And then we can actually see our job here where it is a successful implementation right here with our con 12. And we can see that it's actually completed the job. All the different blocks here within the Databricks workbook have worked, and it was autonomously testing it, got it to work with the other catalog, and then I asked it to change it, and then it failed, and then eventually succeeded again. And here we have our ticket that it created and was ultimately acting upon to complete the job. So all of this infrastructure took place from our prompt to Cursor here. And, I was giving it feedback saying, hey, your most recent run failed here with a screenshot. And it kept going. And I was lightly monitoring what it was doing it. And then it said, hey, sometimes I've noticed even Claude Code does this. Hey, you need to, run the different Databricks CLI commands. And so I said, hey, you please run it, ensure it's working. And then ultimately goes through and I give it a little bit more detailed catalog command there. This is a lot of text as it's writing out a lot of its work. And I said, hey, this is a job where it failed with that error, giving it specific errors. Again, it's hooked up to Databricks CLI, right? And so I can just give it the context, copy and paste the link, and then it will run the commands that it needs to. And very much in the same way that Claude Code does, it ultimately reached a completion state where it wrote out the final readmes for the ticket being completed, which we can see underneath my user here, as well as the Databricks job as well. And what I'm going to do is actually have this change to Databricks jobs _ cursor. That way it's clearly distinguished from the Databricks job that we will create with Claude Code in our next section. All right, now that the cursor analysis is done and we've saved our work onto a branch and then switched back to main locally, we have none of that previous work that was done by cursor, so we can get a true comparison test for the same analysis. I am going to run this prompt, which again is the exact same prompt. However, there are two aspects that are different here, where there's this sentence that initially was given to cursor as feedback, and then also this folder location here, where I'm actually going to change that a little bit here and alter it to Databricks _ Claude folder. And I also mentioned to not use any of the infrastructure in Databricks to do this. So we will click enter, and then we will also hide the chat here and hide the agent. And now we're back to working as we normally have with Claude Code inside of Cursor, not actually using the Cursor functionality, but rather using it like a traditional IDE like VS Code. But we'll pause here, let the plan mode run, and then we'll come back once we have a plan. And here is Claude's plan to bring in the Arizona climate data. It selected the Open Media API, has the Arizona cities, creating the Jira ticket, creating the right folder structure, building the Python notebook, ultimately creating the job config, the schedule, step 5, step 6, and step 7, step 8. All right, cool. We have what looks like to be a good plan. I'll say I do like this interface. There's pros and cons to both, right? I think Claude Code does a really nice job of presenting these plans in the terminal, and you can chat with it to actually get your plan done. And as well as you can open your file in the editor if I command and click, and I can edit my plan in there, which it's called Fuzzy Booping Ember. So a very fun plan name. And then a nice part about this as well is you can clear the context and bypass permissions, which essentially means that we'll refresh the context window and it will immediately start with this plan as the prompt, which is another nice feature of Claude Code that at least didn't see in Cursor at this point, and this very well could change very soon given how fast this technology is working. So we will click yes, clear context, and bypass permissions, and it will run this plan step by step, and it's outputting its to-do list here. And I will monitor this and see how it goes and present you all with the results once it completes. All right, we have completed the work, and similar to Cursor, it took a few rounds of iteration with Claude Code to ultimately get the right output that I wanted. And granted, I think that might have been more of a prompting issue on my part, given that I could have better written the prompt to be more specific with my output criteria for both Cursor and Claude. So just another note, a lot of these potential issues, potential iterations that you see with any of these coding assistants might come down to how you're prompting it. And it's something that I'm still learning how to do better and better every day. But we can see here it's going through actually, running the job, creating it, doing test runs, etc., through the whole conversation. And one of the nice things about Cursor is that you have the ability to kind of click through your conversation just to present it side by side here. Having a little bit of trouble. There we go. Where if I look at this analysis, you can kind of see the last prompt that you gave to the Cursor agent. Whereas here you have to scroll up and find it, or you can just use the up arrow as well. So that said, let's actually look in the Databricks interface as well as the Jira interface to see what happened here. And we can see now we have our two analysis. Con 13 is Claude, Con 12 is Cursor, and Con 13 had a successful run. It definitely tested a little bit less than, or took a little bit less iteration rounds than Cursor did. But ultimately, I think that was, prompting, and plus maybe it just approached it a little bit better and had a little bit less iteration with than Cursor. But I think it's relatively negligible, not any amount of evidence to draw any significant conclusions from what's better or what's worse. And then if we look at the Unity catalog, we can see climate demo Claude, default monthly Arizona weather, and then we have Arizona weather monthly for Cursor. So that's a huge difference right there, obviously. Just kidding. And then we have the ticket here for con 13. So in short, they both worked and they both succeeded. So where does that leave us when comparing the tools? Answering that question of comparing Claude Code and Cursor, ultimately, I think it leaves us with this comparison framework where there's a lot of different dimensions here for context system, modes, models, custom agents, kind of the best for cases, the commands, and a lot of the answers are very, very similar or slightly varied in a nuanced way. So ultimately, what you can do in Claude Code, you can probably do in Cursor and vice versa. They're very similar tools. And in fact, Cursor is built off of Anthropic models, which are the models behind Claude Code, right? And so this leads me to the conclusion that this bottom sentence here of they can do very similar things, and it mostly comes down to your context engineering setup and the prompting of the tool. When you get more specific prompts, better context, you're going to get more deterministic output for what you actually expected from this generative AI model. And we can actually compare the outputs if we would like to, where we have this Arizona data climate or data collection from our Claude run here, which is about 214 lines of code. And then we have this climate refresh from Cursor, which is 117 lines of code. So based on code amounts alone, Cursor wrote less code, but is it better? Is it worse? Ultimately, you can read this code and look at the outcomes, and perhaps there's ways where we can prompt Cursor and Claude to say, hey, tighten this up and get faster, get running faster for the code. But ultimately, they both ran in under a minute. So very negligible difference in terms of actual performance when I go back and look at these two jobs and how fast they ran here too. So 52 seconds and 44 seconds. So ultimately, as is many things with AI, it comes down to you and how you prompt and context engineer with both of these tools that will determine whether or not it is performing to the best of its abilities for your data use cases. Now, day has turned into night while I've been recording this, so now it is time to wrap up. To recap, we looked at what Cursor is and how it uses a different but very similar context engineering setup to Claude Code, and we built the same Databricks weather job with both Cursor and Claude Code, focusing on Arizona. And again, you can utilize this for real business cases with real APIs. I just chose this as it was an open, free, available API about climate change data. And then lastly, we saw that both tools produce quality results when you invest in context engineering and building the context around the tool. Now, you may ask yourself, all of this information is great, but what should I do about it? First, if you have analysis paralysis about using one agent coding assistant or another, do not fret. Just choose one and dive in. I promise you will not regret it. The more important skill is learning how to utilize these AI agentic coding systems for data analysis workflows than it is about choosing the right tool, as the principles will apply from one to the other. Secondly, invest time in your context files, whether it's the Claude Markdown, Agents Markdown, the rules files, the commands, the subagents. The more specific your instructions, the better your results will be. My 700-line context files certainly came about through lots of iterations, and you'll find that as you refine the context, the results will get better and better. So in closing, the AI coding tool landscape is growing fast, but the real competitive advantage isn't the tool, it's how well you engineer the context around it and how well you understand how to work with AI in general. If you found this useful, please like and subscribe. I'm creating more content on AI-assisted data workflows, and let me know in the comments which tool you prefer or any questions you'd have about this video. I'd love to hear about your experiences and thoughts. And as always, Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you next time.